The Interstellar Coalition's central military archives on the frozen lunar mare of Tranquillitatis do not keep track of ordinary combat logs. Out of millions of tactical feeds streamed from across the star systems, File 99 Omega was permanently marked with 3 glowing crimson skulls. It begins not with voice communications or mechanical telemetry, but with a sound that bypasses the human auditory system entirely. It vibrates directly through the marrow inside your bones. It is a low, terrifying subterranean roar, an acoustic shockwave capable of liquefying the internal nervous systems of highly trained planetary assault shock troopers. The camera feed shakes violently, covered in thick grey volcanic ash, frozen mud, and splatter patterns of dark, highly luminescent alien blood. But as the automated optical lens self-corrects and stabilizes, there is no mangled human corpse lying in the crater. Instead, standing in the very epicenter of a burning planetary wreckage, covered in jagged claw marks and singed alloy armor, is Cadet Leo Miller. He is a 22-year-old engineering dropout from Columbus, Ohio, who was never supposed to survive his first physical evaluation term, let alone a planetary drop. Leo reaches up with a mud-caked composite glove, calmly wipes the optical camera lens clean, and pans the wide-angle frame to his left. Standing right beside him, its massive armored snout resting lightly against Leo's shoulder like an eager working dog, is a 6-ton apex monstrosity. The creature's carbon-black scales reflect the burning fires of destroyed military dropships around them. Its razor-sharp mandibles drip with highly acidic saliva, and a complex series of brilliant crimson bioluminescent stripes pulse along its massive, armored ribcage. Smile for the High Council back home. Buddy, Leo whispers into his helmet microphone, his voice unnaturally steady despite the absolute tactical devastation surrounding him. The senior drill instructors back at the Lunar Citadel are going to have an absolute heart attack when they pull this footage off the hard drive. This is the classified, scrubbed record of the deadliest final examination in Interstellar Coalition history, the Crucible. The Interstellar Coalition Military Academy was constructed for one brutal, unrelenting purpose: to systematically break the weak and mold the remaining survivors into unyielding weapons capable of holding the galactic frontier. Mankind was completely surrounded by older, highly aggressive alien empires that viewed humanity as nothing more than a fragile, soft-bodied species ripe for territorial conquest. Cadet Leo Miller was the absolute last individual anyone expected to see, wearing standard-issue cadet armor. He wasn't born into a prestigious military dynasty of decorated Starfleet admirals. His father was a tired diesel mechanic in a small industrial town, and his mother worked grueling 16-hour shifts at an orbital logistics cargo depot. Leo was lean, quiet, prone to severe atmospheric motion sickness, and possessed a quiet, analytical mind that preferred taking apart discarded servo motors over practicing brutal hand-to-hand combat routines. You looked like a mild earth breeze would snap your spine in half, let alone the crushing atmospheric shear of a Class 9 Deathworld, Commander Harrison sneered. His booming voice slammed off the reinforced titanium bulkheads of the staging bay like heavy artillery fire. Harrison was a legendary battle-scarred veteran of the Orion border campaigns, a massive man whose entire jaw had been blasted away by plasma fire years ago and replaced with a grim, polished chrome prosthetic. Leo didn't flinch. He adjusted the heavy chest harness of his standard-issue Lockheed Martin Mk4 orbital dropsuit. "I know how the thruster relays function under pressure, sir. That's usually enough to keep from smashing into the ground at terminal velocity. Knowing how an engine works won't stop an apex predator from ripping your windpipe out, Miller," Harrison roared, stepping inches from Leo's face, the metallic stench of polished steel radiating from his prosthetic jaw. "Today is the Crucible. 40 cadets are being dropped onto planet Xylon 9, a tidally locked Deathworld. Your objective is simple: Survive 72 hours with nothing but a basic survival blade, an emergency distress beacon, and your shoulder-mounted optical recording rig. If you die out there, make sure you don't stain my official paperwork. The warning lights in the staging bay shifted from solid amber to a flashing predatory red. Xylon 9 was notorious across the entire known galaxy, commonly referred to by fleet pilots as the meat grinder. The planet was tidally locked in perpetual alignment with its harsh red star. One half of the world was an incinerating desert of boiling rock, while the opposite half was a pitch-black, frozen abyss known exclusively as the Midnight Zone. The designated drop point for the cadet evaluation was the narrow twilight line, a thin strip of perpetual dusk where atmospheric temperatures were barely tolerable for organic life forms. Leo stepped inside drop pod 14. The heavy pneumatic restraint harness slammed down over his chest with a heavy metallic clank, locking him securely into the cold steel seat. Through the thick, triple-reinforced quartz viewport, he could see the swirling, bruised purple atmospheric clouds of Xylon 9 rushing up to swallow them through the blackness of space. Drop in 3, 2, 1. Good hunting, cadets. Try not to embarrass the human race. Harrison's harsh voice crackled over the comms before cutting out into static. The explosive holding bolts detonated with a deafening bang. Leo's stomach stayed behind in high orbit as Pod 14 plummeted straight toward the planet. The atmospheric entry was an absolute nightmare of violent vibrations and searing heat. White-hot friction fire licked across the ablative heat shield outside the glass viewport, glowing a blinding white. But just as the automated guidance system attempted to engage to steer the pod toward the safe twilight zone, a sickening mechanical shudder tore through the vessel's frame. Critical guidance, telemetry failure. Crimson emergency hazard lights flooded the small cabin. A jagged fragment of orbital space debris had punched straight through the pod's external stabilization fins. The Lockheed Martin thruster relays exploded in a sudden cloud of superheated plasma. Leo's fingers flew across the manual override console with lightning speed, his deep engineering background taking total control over his panic. He flipped breaker switches, rerouted high-voltage backup power cables, and attempted to bypass the completely fried guidance microchip. Come on, you ungrateful piece of scrap metal. Pitch up! Leo screamed over the deafening, bone-rattling roar of re-entry. It was entirely useless. The pod was spinning uncontrollably, thrown completely off its calculated descent path. It wasn't heading toward the safe, monitored twilight line. It was screaming at Mach 6 straight into the Midnight Zone, the dark side of Xylon 9. A territory of permanent dark, sub-zero cryogenic blizzards, and monstrous evolutionary abominations that had adapted to hunt in absolute pitch-black shadows. The pod tore through thick, suffocating layers of frozen toxic cloud cover. Below, a colossal forest of crystalline, obsidian-like trees emerged rapidly from the dark mist. Impact imminent. Dot 14 slammed into the canopy of glass-hard branches with an earth-shattering crunch. Massive crystalline limbs shattered into millions of flying fragments, absorbing just enough kinetic force to prevent the pod from instantly vaporizing on impact. The vessel flipped 3 times in mid-air, tore through dense petrified undergrowth, and plowed a colossal 100-yard trench into the icy, mud-drenched soil before coming to a violent halt upside down. Silence descended, heavy, suffocating and absolute. Leo hung upside down in his restraint harness, gasping frantically for thin air. Warm, thick blood dripped from a deep gash on his temple, splashing onto the cracked viewport beneath his head. The internal emergency lighting flickered weakly, casting a sickly yellow glow inside the smoking cabin. He unbuckled his safety harness and fell hard against the reinforced ceiling of the overturned pod with a groan. He tapped his tactical wristcom, dead. The external tracking antenna had been completely sheared off during the descent. The distress beacon was shattered into useless plastic and copper wiring. He was entirely off the grid, hundreds of miles away from the designated operational theater. Stranded in the most lethal environment known to the Coalition, if he stayed inside the ruined pod, he would die of severe hypothermia within hours. Leo braced his uninjured shoulder against the jammed emergency hatch, hit the manual hydraulic release override, and shoved with all his physical strength. The heavy metal door hissed in violent protest and burst open, allowing the freezing, ozone-heavy air of the midnight zone to rush into his lungs. The air smelled strongly of ozone, crushed minerals, and cold copper blood. Towering around Leo were massive petrified trees constructed of solid black stone and razor-sharp crystal. Glowing bioluminescent fungi clung to the massive trunks, casting ghostly blue and sickly green hues across the eerie forest floor. It was the only source of illumination in a vast world that had never once experienced a sunrise. Leo dragged his military survival kit from the smoking wreckage. He possessed a standard combat blade, a magnesium firestarter rod, 3 tactical water pouches, a thermal blanket, and his shoulder-mounted optical recording rig. The camera rig was originally meant to stream his evaluation directly to the Academy grading servers, but without an orbital uplink array, it was simply storing video footage locally to an internal hard drive. Leo stared at the tiny, blinking red recording light on the camera housing. A profound, crushing wave of total isolation washed over him. He was light years from Earth, 22 years old, completely alone, and statistically guaranteed to perish within 12 hours. He reached up and manually engaged the local hard drive recording loop. "My name is Cadet Leo Miller," he said into his shoulder microphone, his breath forming thick white plumes in the freezing, stagnant air. He stared directly into the optical camera lens. "Location unknown, Xylon 9 Midnight Zone. Drop Pod 14 suffered catastrophic thruster failure during re-entry. I'm stranded far off the grid. If whoever finds this storage drive is human, please tell my parents back in Columbus that I didn't panic. I'm going to document everything I encounter out here. Maybe the Academy Biology Department can use the footage of whatever eats me." Leo knew that remaining near the crash site was absolute suicide. The pungent smell of burning fuel and human blood was an unmissable dinner bell for local predators. He strapped the camera securely to his shoulder gear and began marching through the treacherous, uneven terrain. The freezing mud sucked at his boots like hungry mouths with every step he took. The ambient soundscape of the Midnight Zone was a psychological nightmare. Distant mechanical clicks, deep bass rumbles that vibrated directly inside his chest cavity, and sudden high-pitched shrieks that cut off in absolute, violent silence. After 2 agonizing hours of hiking through sub-zero winds, Leo located a small natural cave formed by the tangled, petrified roots of an ancient fallen stone tree. It offered solid cover from 3 directions. Gathering dry, bioluminescent moss and brittle sap from the root bark, he used his magnesium rod to strike a sharp spark. A small, cheerful flame flickered to life. The heat was an immediate relief, pushing back the creeping frostbite that was settling into his fingertips. Leo set the recording rig on a flat rock, framing himself beside the small fire. "Log entry 2, Leo muttered, rubbing his shivering hands directly over the small flame. "Temperature is dropping rapidly. I estimate it is currently minus 30 degrees Celsius. The planetary atmosphere here is hyperoxygenated, so fires burn fast and bright. But I desperately need the heat to survive the night." He pulled out the ruined remnants of the drop pod's internal comm array that he had stripped before abandoning the crash site. Using his combat knife, he carefully stripped the high-grade copper wiring and extracted 4 heavy-duty microcapacitors. For the next hour, his hands worked with steady, practiced engineering precision. He wasn't a master soldier who could hit a moving target from a mile away. He was a mechanic, a tinkerer. He rigged a thin copper tripwire across the narrow entrance of the root cave. wiring it directly into the charged microcapacitors. I've constructed a makeshift electrostatic perimeter trap, Leo explained directly to the camera, pointing at the crude wiring setup. If anything touches this wire, the microcapacitors will discharge instantly, creating a loud acoustic pop and a blinding flash of high-voltage blue electrical light. It won't kill a massive apex predator, but the sudden shock should startle it long enough for me to run or attempt a defense. Human ingenuity at its finest, Leo wrapped himself tightly inside his thermal blanket, clutching the survival blade against his chest. He didn't dare close his eyes for a single second. He lay in the dark, listening to the Deathworld breathe around him. Around 300 hours, the ambient sounds of the surrounding forest vanished instantly. The distant clicking, the chirping organisms, the shifting wind, everything died into a heavy, suffocating silence. The tiny hairs on Leo's arms stood up on end. Snap! A massive stone branch shattered 50 yards away in the thick brush. Then came a slow, rhythmic, bone-rattling thud, 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 footsteps, heavy enough to send visible ripples through the small puddles of muddy water on the cave floor. Whatever was walking through the obsidian trees wasn't trying to stealthily stalk its prey. It moved with absolute terrifying authority. It was the undisputed alpha of this subterranean ecosystem. It knew that nothing in this forest possessed the physical strength to challenge its dominance. Leo held his breath, his knuckles turning stark white around the textured hilt of his knife. He tapped his shoulder camera twice, ensuring the low-light infrared sensors were locked onto the cave entrance. If he was about to be torn to pieces, the Academy was going to receive every single frame in high definition. Suddenly, a massive shadow broke the copper tripwire outside. Crack! A brilliant, blinding flash of blue-white electrical voltage exploded at the mouth of the root cave. The high-voltage arc illuminated a terrifying nightmare in the dark mist. An ear-splitting, roaring scream shattered the night air, a sound so violent and packed with raw acoustic force that it instantly snuffed out Leo's small campfire, plunging the cave back into pitch-black shadow. The sheer shockwave of the sonic roar knocked Leo backward hard against the petrified root wall. He pressed himself deep into the narrowest crevice of the cave, waiting for massive claws to reach inside and drag him out. He waited for his young life to end. Leo waited for 10 agonizing minutes, but the brutal attack never materialized. Instead, the terrifying roar slowly transformed into a series of ragged, wet gasps. Heavy thuds echoed as an immense weight collapsed hard into the mud directly outside his shelter. Then came a sound that made no logical sense, a low, resonant, suffering whimper. Leo stayed completely frozen. The heavy, labored breathing outside continued just 10 yards away. It didn't sound like a monster waiting to spring a clever ambush. It sounded like a massive creature dying in terrible agony. Human curiosity, that fatal, unstoppable instinct, began to override his blinding terror. He detached the optical camera from his shoulder strap, setting the floodlight to a dim, non-threatening red hue. Slowly, inch by agonizing inch, Leo crawled out of the root cave into the freezing mist. The red light beam swept across the muddy clearing. Lying on its side, thrashing weakly in the mud, was a creature of terrifying physical perfection. It was an apex predator, easily 15 feet long, built like a nightmare fusion of an armored dinosaur and a massive black wolf. Thick, carbon-black scales covered its spine, while its underbelly was a dark, leathery gray. Bioluminescent stripes ran along its massive flanks, but right now they were flashing a frantic, erratic, dying crimson light. As Leo's red light beam focused on the beast's neck, he realized why it hadn't attacked him. Clinging to the creature's neck, underbelly, and soft joint plates were dozens of translucent foot-long parasite leeches. Their sickly, pale bodies were pulsing rhythmically as they drained the massive predator's blood, injecting toxic paralytic venom directly into its bloodstream. The massive beast pawed weakly at its own throat with a scythe-like claw, but it was far too exhausted, too drained of blood to dislodge them. The creature slowly shifted its massive head. Its large, liquid gold eyes locked directly onto Leo. In that single, quiet moment, Leo didn't see a terrifying space monster. He saw an animal suffering in absolute agony. It was the exact same helpless look his family dog back in Ohio had given him when its leg got trapped in a rusted barbed wire fence years ago. "You see in this academy?" Leo whispered, pointing the camera lens directly at the dying behemoth. "This is the big bad nightmare of Xylon 9. It's being slowly eaten alive by oversized alien ticks." Standard military doctrine dictated by Commander Harrison was absolute. Never engage local fauna unless to destroy or harvest. Never show empathy. Empathy on a Deathworld is a fatal flaw. Leo looked at the beast. He looked at his small combat blade. He pulled an emergency magnesium flare from his utility belt. "To hell with Harrison's protocol," Leo muttered under his breath. He set the camera down on a stone stump, angling the lens toward the clearing. He struck the emergency flare. A blinding, white-hot magnesium fire erupted, bathing the dark forest in intense thermal heat. The parasites writhed in immediate agony from the intense heat wave. Leo stepped forward into the open clearing. The massive predator let out a low, vibrating growl from deep within its chest, bearing rows of razor-sharp teeth the size of combat daggers. "Easy. Big guy," Leo said, keeping his voice low, steady, and projecting a calm he definitely didn't feel inside. "Easy. I'm not here to hurt you. Let me help." The beast was simply too exhausted to strike. Its massive head fell back heavily into the freezing mud. Leo stepped right up to the creature's massive neck. The air around it smelled strongly of heavy musk, ozone, and copper blood. He brought the burning flare inches away from one of the translucent parasites. The intense thermal heat was unbearable for the creature. It shrieked a high-pitched sound, unclasped its mandibles, and dropped into the mud. Crunch. Leo brought his heavy combat boot down, crushing the parasite into a splash of black slime. For the next 2 hours, working tirelessly in the freezing cold, Leo systematically cleared the beast. He used the flare to burn off the stubborn leeches, and for the ones buried deep near the jugular, he used his combat knife, carefully slicing the parasites open while making sure not to nick the predator's leathery hide. The 6-ton monster remained astonishingly still. It flinched whenever the steel blade cut close to its skin, but it never once snapped its jaws. It seemed to understand that this strange, hairless biped was performing a life-saving service. By the time Leo crushed the final parasite, his hands were covered in black alien blood, and his body was shaking uncontrollably from pure physical exhaustion. His emergency flare sputtered and died, plunging them back into the soft blue bioluminescence of the forest. Leo collapsed backward against the trunk of a petrified tree, gasping frantically for air. Slowly, the massive beast hauled its colossal frame up onto 4 muscular legs. It towered over Leo, casting a massive shadow across the clearing. Its bioluminescent stripes shifted from frantic red to a calm, steady, tranquil blue. Leo held his breath. "This is it," he thought. "I saved it, and now I'm dessert." The monster lowered its massive snout inches from Leo's face. Its hot, metallic breath washed over him. Then it opened its jaws and gave Leo's chest a firm, playful nudge with its blunt nose, knocking the air right out of his lungs. The 6-ton apex predator then slowly curled its massive armored body entirely around the tree Leo was sitting against, encircling the human in an unbreakable wall of heated armored scales. It let out a deep, vibrating sigh that shook the bedrock, rested its giant chin on its front paws, and closed its eyes. Leo sat there, completely pinned between a stone tree and 6 tons of pure muscle. He reached over, grabbed his camera, and turned the lens toward his face. "Log update," Leo whispered, a wild, disbelieving smile breaking across his muddy face. "I think I just adopted a 6-ton alien guard dog. I'm calling him Barnaby. If you want to see how Leo and Barnaby face the deadliest war on this planet, smash that subscribe button and hit the bell notification right now. Leave a comment below with your thoughts. Can human empathy really conquer a galactic death world? The freezing night air of the Midnight Zone slowly gave way to a subtle shifting of ambient hues, though on the dark side of Xylon 9, a true sunrise would never come. Leo woke to a deep, rhythmic vibration pulsing directly through his chest cavity. For a disorienting second, he thought an earthquake was ripping the petrified roots of the cave apart. Then he opened his eyes and realized the sound was coming from Barnaby. The 6-ton apex monster was purring. The sound was a resonant, low-frequency hum that vibrated the frozen mud beneath them and kept the ambient air within their tiny biological circle surprisingly warm. Leo shifted slowly, trying not to startle the giant beast. Barnaby's crimson bioluminescent stripes had settled into a gentle, electric violet rhythm, signaling a state of complete rest and recovery. The toxic parasite leeches had been burned away, leaving raw black scars across his thick scales, but the creature's immense vitality was already repairing the damaged tissue. As Leo sat up, Barnaby uncurled his massive, armored tail and lifted his colossal head, blinking his large golden eyes with a strange, intelligence-filled calm. "Good morning, big guy," Leo murmured into his shoulder mic, making sure the camera captured the extraordinary sight. "If the Academy board is watching this back on the Lunar Citadel, I suggest you update your tactical classification manuals. The deadly Xylon 9 apex predator is currently acting like a giant scaly heating blanket." Leo checked his survival gear. His water pouches were empty, and his thermal battery was depleted from running the emergency flare. In a sub-zero death world, lack of hydration and internal body heat were silent killers that worked far faster than local wildlife. He needed to find a clean water source and salvageable supplies, which meant leaving the relative safety of the root cave and venturing deeper into the uncharted obsidian forest. He stood up, his joints aching from the crushing cold. Barnaby immediately rose to his feet, towering nearly 16 feet at the shoulder. The massive creature shook his armored hide, sending small ice crystals showering down like glitter. When Leo took his first step toward the dense tree line, Barnaby didn't attack or slink away into the shadows. He fell into step directly beside the young human, his heavy claws sinking into the icy soil with absolute purpose. For the next 4 hours, the pair navigated through the labyrinth of petrified stone trees and razor-sharp crystal formations. Whenever a hidden threat lurked in the dark undergrowth, such as pack-hunting shadow stalkers or venomous razor vines, Barnaby would simply unleash a low, sub-audible rumble. The invisible acoustic shockwave sent surrounding predators fleeing in absolute terror long before Leo even spotted them. The human was no longer prey on a death world. He was traveling with the undisputed king of the ecosystem. Around midday, the terrain began to slope steeply downward into a massive volcanic rift valley. Rising from the center of the steaming geothermal canyon was the scorched, shattered hull of another coalition drop pod. Leo's heart hammered against his ribs. "Drop pod 07, he read from the faint white serial numbers painted across the singed titanium plating. "That's Cadet Marcus's pod." Marcus was one of the top-ranked combat candidates in the Academy, an aggressive, heavily built soldier who had spent months mocking Leo's engineering background. Leo scrambled down the steep volcanic embankment, with Barnaby navigating the sheer rocks with terrifying agility. As Leo approached the crash site, he saw that Pod 07 hadn't slammed into the earth upside down like his own. It had executed a partial retro-thruster burn before plowing into the ground, but the impact had still crumpled the main airlock door like a cheap tin can. More disturbingly, the ground surrounding the pod was torn up by heavy boots and massive alien claw marks. "Marcus!" Leo shouted, his voice echoing off the basalt canyon walls. "Is anyone in there?" A weak, groaning sound came from behind a pile of shattered thermal shielding. Leo rushed over and found Cadet Marcus slumped against the hot metal plating of his ruined thruster assembly. His tactical armor was cracked open at the shoulder, revealing a nasty, blackened burn wound, and his face was pale with advanced shock and dehydration. His survival blade lay snapped in half in the mud beside him. "Miller," Marcus rasped, his vision unfocused as he looked up. How are you alive?" The drop. The guidance telemetry fried across the whole grid. "Engineering instinct and a lot of luck," Leo said, immediately kneeling beside his former bully and pulling out his medical kit. "Hold still. Your shoulder is infected with local biological rot. I need to cauterize the tissue before it hits your bloodstream." As Leo carefully applied a sterile thermal pad to Marcus's shoulder, a sudden heavy shadow fell over both of them. Marcus turned his head and froze. His eyes dilated in absolute primitive horror. Standing on the ridge directly above them, looking down with glowing gold eyes and dripping mandibles, was Barnaby. Marcus let out a strangled scream and blindly reached for his broken blade, his entire body trembling violently. "Monster! Miller, get behind me!" "It's an Alpha Apex," Marcus shrieked, trying to crawl backward into the burning wreckage of his pod. "Marcus, stop moving!" Leo commanded, stepping directly between the terrified cadet and the 6-ton behemoth. "He's not going to hurt you. He's with me." "Are you insane?" Marcus gasped, clutching his wounded shoulder. "That's a Class 10 planetary killer. It will rip your head off." Leo didn't answer with words. Instead, he turned his back on the giant beast, reached up, and patted Barnaby's massive, razor-sharp snout. Barnaby let out a soft, huffing breath, leaning his heavy head into Leo's palm like a massive cat. Marcus stared at the scene in absolute, speechless stupefaction. The top combat cadet of the academy, trained in every form of hand-to-hand warfare, was reduced to a trembling wreck, while the mild-mannered engineering dropout was casually petting the deadliest creature on the planet. "He likes his chin scratched right under the 3rd scale plate," Leo said calmly, pulling a fresh water pouch from Pod 07's surviving supply rack and handing it to Marcus. "Drink this. You've lost a lot of fluids." Marcus drank greedily, his hands shaking so hard he spilled half the water down his chest armor. As his mind slowly processed the impossible reality before him, he looked at Leo with a mixture of profound awe and deep embarrassment. How did you tame that thing?" "I didn't tame him," Leo replied, checking his camera rig to ensure the optical feed was still recording. "I helped him when he was dying. Out here, Harrison taught us that empathy is a weakness. But Harrison was wrong. Empathy is the exact tool that kept me alive, while the rest of the tactical training went out the window." Before Marcus could reply, a high-pitched, metallic pinging sound echoed from the pod's surviving comms console. Leo rushed inside the smoking cabin and wiped the soot off the primary display screen. The emergency tactical grid was flickering back to life. Because they were in a high-elevation volcanic canyon, the pod's secondary repeater antenna was picking up a faint distress broadcast from the Twilight Line, the official evaluation zone miles away. The broadcast wasn't a standard cadet check-in. It was an emergency military distress loop, recorded by Commander Harrison himself, and his voice was laced with something Leo had never heard before: absolute desperation. All remaining cadets execute immediate evasive maneuvers. Harrison's voice crackled through thick static, punctuated by the deafening sound of heavy plasma cannon fire and roaring explosions. "We are under heavy attack by an unidentified alien war party. Repeat, an illegal mercenary fleet has landed in the Twilight Zone. They are hunting cadets for sport and harvesting local planetary resources. Standard Academy distress beacons are jammed. Any cadet receiving this? Stay hidden. Do not attempt to reach the extraction LZ." The transmission cut out in a violent burst of white noise. The air inside the canyon grew deathly cold. Marcus looked at Leo, his face draining of what little color it had left. "Mercenaries? Illegal poachers? Miller, the Academy defense ships are miles away in high orbit. If poachers have landed ground troops with heavy weapons, the remaining cadets at the twilight line are getting slaughtered. Leo stared at the blinking crimson distress light on the console. He was a 22-year-old dropout with a broken drop pod, a basic knife, and an injured fellow cadet. Standard survival protocol dictated that he stay hidden in the midnight zone until the Coalition fleet realized what was happening and sent a full battlecruiser deployment. Leo turned around and walked out of the pod into the open clearing. Barnaby was watching him intently, his bioluminescent stripes pulsing a deep, expectant indigo. "We aren't hiding," Leo said, his voice dropping into a quiet, rock-solid register that surprised even himself. "Are you crazy?" Marcus yelled, dragging himself out of the pod. "Those are professional alien mercenaries. They have heavy plasma rifles, armored transports, and combat shields. We have nothing." Leo looked at Marcus, then turned his gaze toward the massive 6-ton apex predator standing beside him. A slow, dangerous smile spread across the young engineer's face. "We don't need plasma rifles," Leo said softly, patting Barnaby's armored shoulder. "We have the Midnight Zone, and we have the biggest monster on the planet." Leo climbed onto Barnaby's broad, scale-plated back, anchoring himself tightly against the thick ridge along the beast's neck. Barnaby let out a low, battle-ready roar that shook the very dust off the volcanic walls, turning his massive golden eyes toward the twilight zone. "Stay close and keep your head down." "Marcus!" Leo called back, his eyes locked on the horizon where smoke was already rising into the sky. "The poachers think they came here to hunt us, but they have no idea what's coming for them." The icy wind of the midnight zone whipped against Leo's face as Barnaby tore through the crystalline forest at full speed. Behind them, Marcus was doing his absolute best to keep pace on foot, fueled by pure, desperate adrenaline and the terrifying sight of a 6-ton beast clearing a path through the obsidian trees. Barnaby moved with fluid, lethal grace, a silent shadow that glided over treacherous ice patches and leaping over deep volcanic fissures as if they were nothing more than minor puddles. As they approached the border of the twilight line, the vast expanse of perpetual dusk revealed a nightmarish scene. Thick, oily black smoke rolled across the horizon, blotting out the faint red light of Xylon 9's distant star. The heavy, metallic thud of high-caliber plasma cannons echoed across the canyon, followed by the agonizing screams of terrified cadets being hunted like helpless prey. Leo pulled a pair of tactical optical binoculars from his belt and brought them to his eyes. Through the thermal lens, he spotted the enemy force. It wasn't a standard military squad. It was an illegal mercenary syndicate known as the Iron Vipers. They were heavily armored poachers who operated in the uncharted fringes of outer space, hunting rare, protected apex predators to harvest their bioluminescent scales and organ tissue for the galactic black market. Down in the valley, 3 massive, multi-wheeled armored troop transports were parked in a defensive triangle formation. Over 24 heavily armed mercenaries in reinforced titanium exosuits were sweeping through the burning remnants of the cadet base camp. They weren't just harvesting the local wildlife, they were actively executing any cadet who attempted to defend themselves, ensuring there would be no surviving witnesses to report their illegal operation to the Interstellar Coalition. In the center of the burning camp, stripped of his command armor and bound with heavy, energy-reinforced suppression chains, was Commander Harrison. His chrome prosthetic jaw glinted under the flickering flames of a burning supply depot. A massive, scar-faced mercenary captain stood over him, pressing the glowing, superheated barrel of a plasma rifle directly against Harrison's forehead. "Where are the rest of the specimens, old man?" The mercenary captain sneered, his voice amplified through his helmet's mechanical speaker. "Our bioscanners indicated this region was crawling with Class 10 apex beasts. If you don't tell me where they nest, I'll blow your skull wide open right now." Commander Harrison spat blood onto the captain's heavy boots, his eyes blazing with unyielding, stubborn defiance. "Execute me and be done with it, you poacher scum," You won't get a single word out of me. The Coalition fleet will be here within hours, and they will turn your ships into cosmic scrap metal. The Coalition fleet is 3 light-years away. Old man, the captain laughed, pulling back the heavy charging bolt of his rifle. No one is coming to save you, or these pathetic weaklings. High above the valley on the volcanic ridge, Marcus gasped, pulling his head down behind a boulder. Miller, this is insane. They have heavy plasma cannons, personal energy shields, and full thermal tracking arrays. If we go down there, we'll be vaporized in 5 seconds. Leo didn't panic. His engineering mind was working at maximum capacity, analyzing the enemy's defensive setup, power consumption relays, and tactical blind spots. Their armor and energy shields are top tier, Leo said, his voice cold and analytical as he pointed toward the 3 armored transports, lethal against standard energy weapons. But look at their power source. Those 3 transports are tethered together, running off a shared high-voltage subsurface power generator to maintain their localized orbital signal jamming field. If we destroy that generator, their jamming field dies, their shields drop, and the Academy emergency distress beacon goes live instantly. And how exactly do you plan to destroy a military-grade power generator without a heavy rocket launcher? Marcus asked frantically. Leo slowly looked down at Barnaby. The massive beast was crouched low to the ground, his bioluminescent stripes shifting from deep purple to a blinding, furious crimson. Barnaby's nostrils flared as he smelled the metallic stench of the poacher's weapons and the blood of the fallen. Barnaby isn't just strong. Marcus, Leo said, a cold, fierce smile breaking across his face. His scales are composed of a hyperdense carbon crystalline lattice. Standard plasma fire won't penetrate his primary hide. He is a walking 6-ton kinetic siege weapon. Leo reached into his pack, pulled out his optical camera rig, and locked it securely back onto his shoulder harness. He tapped the recording button, ensuring the lens was crystal clear. Log entry 4, Leo said into his microphone, his voice echoing with absolute authority. Location, Twilight Line. We are outgunned, outnumbered, and technically breaking every single rule in the Academy manual. We are about to engage an illegal mercenary army. Leo leaned down, resting his hand against Barnaby's massive neck. All right, buddy. Time to show them why this planet belongs to you. Barnaby let out a subterranean roar that shattered the surrounding crystal trees into thousands of glittering shards. Before, the mercenaries down in the valley could even turn their heavy weapons toward the ridge. 6 tons of pure apex fury descended upon them like a falling meteor. Barnaby vaulted over the cliff face, sliding down the steep volcanic scree with terrifying speed and slamming directly into the outer defensive perimeter. Crash! The impact was catastrophic. Barnaby's colossal frame slammed into the lead armored transport, flipping the 20-ton military vehicle completely upside down like a toy car. The vehicle's high-voltage fuel cells ruptured instantly, exploding into a massive blinding ball of orange fire. What the hell was that? The mercenary captain screamed, blown off his feet by the sheer force of the explosion. It's a Class 10 Apex. It's loose in the camp. A mercenary yelled over the comms, frantically spraying rapid plasma fire into the rising smoke. Superheated blue plasma bolts slammed against Barnaby's chest, but the energy harmlessly dissipated across his carbon-dense scale armor, leaving nothing more than faint scorch marks. Barnaby didn't even flinch. He swiped his massive scythe-like tail in a wide horizontal arc, catching 3 armored mercenaries and launching them 50 feet through the air into the rocky canyon walls. Target the monster. Focus all fire on the beast. The captain roared, panic finally breaking through his voice, while the entire mercenary squad diverted their heavy plasma cannons toward Barnaby. Leo acted with lightning-fast engineering precision. Flanked by Marcus, Leo sprinted through the blinding smoke and chaos, ducking under flying shrapnel and plasma fire. He reached the central subsurface generator that was powering the jamming field. Marcus, cover the left flank, Leo ordered. On it! Marcus yelled, grabbing a fallen mercenary's plasma pistol from the dirt and firing covering shots into the smoke to keep the approaching poachers at bay. Leo pulled his multi-tool from his belt, ripped off the generator's heavy access panel, and examined the high-voltage internal wiring. Standard industrial design. Three-phase magnetic containment core, Leo muttered to himself, his fingers moving with impossible speed. If I overload the primary coolant line and short-circuit the capacitor bank, he thrust his high-carbon survival blade directly into the main coolant conduit. A high-pitched, screaming whine echoed from the generator as superheated coolant fluid sprayed across the ground. The central power core turned a blinding, unstable white. "Clear out!" Leo screamed. Leo and Marcus dove behind a reinforced titanium crate just as the generator exploded in a massive electromagnetic shockwave. A pulse of raw blue energy rippled across the entire valley. Instantly, the poachers' personal energy shields collapsed with a loud fizzle. Their HUD displays went black, and the localized jamming field vanished into thin air. Above the planet, high in orbit, the Interstellar Coalition fleet's deep space sensors suddenly lit up with a massive distress signal originating from Xylon 9. Down in the burning valley, the mercenary captain realized his localized shields were dead and his communications were completely offline. He turned around, his eyes wild with fury, and spotted Leo standing beside the smoking wreckage of the generator. "You little brat!" The captain roared, drawing a heavy plasma sidearm and aiming it directly at Leo's chest. "I'm going to skinner you alive." Leo didn't move an inch. He didn't even raise a weapon. He simply stood there, looking at the captain with a calm, cold expression, and slowly raised his hand to make a subtle, snapping gesture with his fingers. "Barnaby," Leo said quietly. "Fetch!" A colossal shadow fell over the captain. Before the mercenary could even pull his trigger, Barnaby's massive, razor-sharp jaw snapped shut around the captain's heavy plasma rifle, crushing the military weapon into useless metal scrap like a dry twig. Barnaby lowered his giant snout, letting out a hot, low-frequency growl that blew the captain's helmet visor open and sent the terrified mercenary collapsing onto his knees, trembling uncontrollably in the mud. Within minutes, the remaining mercenaries, stripped of their shields, chaos-ridden and terrified of the giant apex monster, threw down their weapons and surrendered unconditionally. Leo walked calmly through the burning wreckage of the camp toward the center of the clearing. Commander Harrison was sitting on the ground, his energy chains deactivated by Marcus. The battle-scarred veteran stared up at Cadet Leo. Miller, the scrawny engineering dropout he had marked just 72 hours ago, standing proudly beside a 6-ton Class 10 planetary predator that was nudging Leo's shoulder like an affectionate pet. Harrison's chrome prosthetic jaw clicked as he tried to find words. "Cadet Miller, what in the name of the Coalition is that thing?" Leo reached up, adjusted his shoulder camera, and tapped the recording button one last time, ensuring the lens captured Harrison's shocked, speechlessly stunned face in full high definition. "This is Barnaby." "Sir," Leo said, his voice ringing with absolute confidence. "And as you can see, my physical evaluation report is complete." The deep space roar of sublight engines shook the heavy atmospheric clouds of Xylon 9 as a massive Coalition dreadnought broke through the upper troposphere. 3 heavy tactical dropships touched down in the burning valley, deploying dozens of heavily armed, shock-armored Coalition peacekeepers. But as the elite soldiers rushed out with weapons raised, ready for a bloody rescue mission, they froze in absolute, stunned silence. There was no active fire zone left to clear. The dangerous mercenary syndicate was sitting bound and gagged in the mud, completely disarmed. Standing over them, guarding the captured poachers like a disciplined drill sergeant, was Barnaby. The 6-ton apex beast let out a low, warning growl whenever a mercenary dared to move an inch, his crimson bioluminescent stripes pulsing with calm authority. Sitting on a crate nearby, casually sipping from a clean water pouch while finishing his medical field patching, was Cadet Leo Miller, The senior tactical medical team immediately rushed to treat Commander Harrison and the surviving cadets. As Harrison was lifted onto a hover stretcher, the battle-scarred veteran stared at Leo, his chrome jaw clicking rapidly as he struggled to find words. "Miller," Harrison rasped, his voice lacking every trace of the harsh sneer he had worn on the orbital staging deck. "You broke every tactical protocol in the Interstellar Coalition handbook. You altered your drop parameters, abandoned your assigned theater, and tamed an unclassifiable Class 10 planetary predator." Harrison paused, looking at the giant beast, currently nudging Leo's hand for another head scratch. "Udrian, you saved the lives of every cadet on this planet. When we return to the lunar citadel, the High Council is going to pull every frame of your recording rig. I hope they enjoy the footage." "Sir," Leo replied with a quiet smile, adjusting his shoulder camera. "I made sure to capture every single angle in high definition." 12 hours later, the Coalition battlecruiser docked at the Interstellar Coalition Military Academy's primary headquarters, the massive, frozen lunar citadel of Tranquilitatis. The central arrival bay was packed with thousands of high-ranking Starfleet admirals, senior drill instructors, elite cadet squads, and galactic news correspondents. Word had already leaked across the orbital network. The drop pod 14 had returned from the deadliest Deathworld in the system, and that a low-ranking engineering dropout had uncovered something that would permanently alter human-alien warfare. Forever, the massive pneumatic pressure doors of the primary dropship hissed open, releasing a cloud of dense white cryogenic vapor. The vast assembly hall went completely dead silent. Stepping down the ramp, clad in his scorched, mud-drenched Mk4 dropsuit, was Cadet Leo Miller. He held his head high, his face clean, his gaze steady and unyielding. But he didn't walk down the ramp alone. Walking right beside him, his massive carbon-black scales glinting under the harsh, bright stadium lights of the lunar citadel, was Barnaby. The 6-ton apex monster walked with a heavy, terrifying rhythm, his razor-sharp claws clicking rhythmically against the pristine titanium floor plating. The High Council admirals instinctively recoiled, taking 3 steps back in sheer primitive panic, while security guards scrambled to raise their heavy plasma rifles. "Hold your fire!" Commander Harrison's booming voice echoed through the docking bay speakers as he stepped forward on his crutches. "Lower your weapons. That beast is under the direct command of Cadet Miller." Leo reached up and patted Barnaby's broad snout, signaling the giant creature to settle down. Barnaby let out a soft, deep hum, leaning his colossal head against Leo's shoulder before sitting heavily onto his hind legs, eyeing the Grand Admirals with intelligent, golden eyes. Grand Admiral Vance, a legendary commander who had led human forces through 3 interstellar wars, stepped forward from the High Council podium. He stared at the giant apex beast, then looked down at Leo, his eyes wide with utter disbelief. "Cadet Miller," Vance spoke, his voice echoing across the silent docking bay. "In the 200-year history of this academy, no human has ever survived a drop into the midnight zone of Xylon 9, let alone domesticated its undisputed apex predator. Tactical doctrine states that local alien species are unyielding biological threats meant to be eliminated." Leo reached up to his shoulder harness, unclipped his optical camera recording rig, and held the small hard drive out toward the High Council. "With all due respect, Admiral," Leo said, his voice ringing loud, clear, and unwavering through the vast hall. "Tactical doctrine is outdated. Commander Harrison taught us that empathy on a death world is a fatal flaw. But empathy is the exact reason I survived. Barnaby wasn't a monster looking to tear me apart. He was an animal in agony, being eaten alive by parasites. I didn't tame him with weapons or force. I saved his life, and in return, he saved mine, and crushed an entire mercenary fleet in the process." Grand Admiral Vance took the storage drive from Leo's hand. He turned toward the massive, holographic projection screen hovering above the docking bay and inserted the drive. Into the main console, the entire assembly watched as File 99 Omega played out across the glowing, screens in crystal-clear high definition. They saw the terrifying crash landing in the Midnight Zone. They saw Leo's makeshift electrostatic perimeter traps. They saw the heart-stopping moment. Leo stepped toward a dying 6-ton behemoth with nothing but a magnesium flare and a combat blade to burn away the parasites. They watched the brutal, earth-shattering battle at the Twilight Line, where Leo and Barnaby dismantled an illegal mercenary army with raw kinetic power and brilliant engineering strategy. When the footage cut to black, revealing Leo's final smiling face beside Barnaby in the volcanic canyon, a deafening silence hung over the thousands of spectators in the Citadel. Then, slowly, Cadet Marcus began to clap. Within seconds, the applause erupted into a roaring stadium-wide ovation. Elite shock troopers, drill instructors, and veteran admirals cheered, stamping their boots against the titanium floor. Grand Admiral Vance stepped up to Leo, standing at crisp military attention, and delivered a sharp, proud salute. "Cadet Leo Miller," Vance announced, his voice amplified across the entire base. "By order of the High Council, your official cadet evaluation status is hereby updated to Supreme Distinction. Furthermore, the Interstellar Coalition is establishing a brand new tactical division, the Xenobiological Vanguard Unit, and appointing you as its chief commander." Vance looked down at the massive, scale-plated beast sitting beside Leo. "And as for your partner, Barnaby is officially granted full tactical clearance as the first recognized Apex Guardian of the Coalition." Barnaby let out a loud, victorious subterranean roar that rattled the thick quartz windows of the lunar citadel, sending a wave of good-natured laughter through the massive crowd. Leo looked up at the star-filled void of space, visible through the citadel's glass dome. He was no longer just a scrawny engineering dropout from Columbus, Ohio, who was expected to fail his first term. He had rewritten the rules of the galactic frontier, proven that compassion was stronger than pure firepower, and forged an unbreakable bond with the deadliest monster in the galaxy. The era of brutal survival was over. The era of the Beast Commander had just begun. If you enjoyed this epic journey of survival, courage, and ultimate bond, make sure to hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and drop a comment below letting us know what alien Deathworld Leo and Barnaby should conquer next. Disclaimer: this video is a work of original fiction. All characters, locations, alien species, and events portrayed in this story are entirely fictional and products of the creator's imagination. Any resemblance to real persons, living or dead, or actual historical events is purely coincidental. All visual and audio materials used are created or licensed for creative storytelling purposes under fair use.